Hello and welcome to the video. Today we'll be going over Atomic Habits by James Clear, an easy and proven way to build good habits and break bad ones. And on top of the title it says Tiny Changes, Remarkable Results. And that's really what the book is all about. Now if you're anything like me, you can be a little wary of reading more literature and more books on habits because there seems to be so much information and so much misinformation out there about how to build habits. But I'm here to tell you that James Clear has really distilled the process of creating good habits and breaking bad habits in this amazing piece of work, Atomic Habits by James Clear. Without any further ado, I'll get into the introduction. First, I wanted to talk a little bit about James Clear. You might be wondering, who is James Clear? Well, his work has appeared in the New York Times, Times Magazine, Entrepreneur Magazine, and CBS This Morning. So some pretty big players have featured Atomic Habits and some of James' other work. He's taught in colleges all around the world. His website, jamesclear.com, gets millions of visitors every single month. And you know that's quite impressive if you're in internet marketing or online businesses whatsoever. 1 million visitors every month is quite something. He also created the Habits Academy, which is the premier training platform for organizations and individuals that are interested in building habits in life and work. Very interesting that he has kind of built his platform all around habits. Now, as an introduction to Atomic Habits, I pulled one of the best quotes that describes the book out of the book. And here it is. If you're having trouble changing your habits, the problem isn't you. The problem is your system. Bad habits repeat themselves again and again, not because you don't want to change, but because you have the wrong system for change. So you can see immediately, without even getting all the way into the summary of the book, that this book is going to be less about habits and more about systems and the system for change in particular. He also goes on to say that you do not rise to the level of your goals, you fall to the level of your systems. Very important. Focusing on the overall system rather than a single goal is one of the core themes of this book. It is also one of the deeper meanings behind the word atomic. By now, you've probably realized that an atomic habit refers to a tiny change, just like it says on the cover of the book, a marginal gain and a 1% improvement. But atomic habits are not just any old habits, however small. They are little habits that are part of a larger system. Just as atoms are the building blocks of molecules, atomic habits are the building blocks of remarkable results. So you can see that he's talking about how atomic habits isn't necessarily just about creating smaller habits, and it's definitely not about creating one giant big habit to rule them all, so to speak, but it's more so about a system, a building block of how to create habits that are going to create those remarkable results in your life. He goes on to say that habits are like the atoms of our lives. Each one is a fundamental unit that contributes to your overall improvement. At first, these tiny routines seem insignificant, but soon they build on each other and fuel bigger wins that multiply to a degree that far outweighs the cost of their initial investment. They're both small and mighty. This is the meaning of the phrase atomic habits. So you can see when he talks about building up habits, he talks about building these tiny routines that might take a small initial investment, but you can see that the amount that you're going to be able to win down the road far outweighs the cost of that initial investment. This is kind of a core tenet of the book where you have to not think about how much can I do in the beginning, but how much do I stand to gain through the power of compounding if I stick to this habit that I've built for myself. He goes on to talk about a regular practice or routine that is not only small and easy to do, but also the source of incredible power, a component of the system of compound growth. And that is essentially what is meant by atomic habits. Now, this book is packed with a lot of really big ideas. It's so good that I would definitely say this one is worth buying, for sure. You should have this one on your shelf as a reference guide because you can consistently go back. If you're having trouble and struggling with something in your life, you can consistently go back and look inside this book and decide maybe where you're going wrong with trying to break a bad habit and maybe where you're going wrong with setting yourself up with some positive habits. And you can get all of the wisdom out of this book, definitely from the book. Very hard to put it all into a mind map. So our first point here that I wanted to make was tiny changes, remarkable results. And the first quote that I pulled out of the book is about kind of overestimating the effort needed in order to make a change in our lives. And James says that it's so easy to overestimate the importance of one defining moment and underestimate the value of making small improvements on a daily basis. Too often, we convince ourselves that massive success requires massive action. Who out there is convincing themselves of that right now? I know I definitely was, especially before reading this book. Whether it's about losing weight, building a business, writing a book, winning a championship, or achieving any other goal, we put pressure on ourselves to make some earth-shattering improvement that everyone will talk about. And you can see that he's not only talking about overestimating effort, but this end part of the sentence is very important as well. We want to put pressure on ourselves in order to change. And it's definitely not the way that you're going to make change the best in your lives, especially if you're trying to make it so that it's some sort of earth-shattering improvement that everyone else will talk about. That's a very telling part of the sentence as well that we'll talk about when we move into identity part of the book as well. So often, we fail to change our behaviors because we convince ourselves that we have to make that drastic change, and I wanted to talk about that just a little bit more. Where have you failed at something because you attempted a massive change? Not necessarily a massive change over a long period of time, but a massive change over a short period of time, making a shift that maybe you didn't necessarily deserve to make based on your identity and based on your past behavior. Also think about, where are you currently putting off changing something so that you are overestimating what it might take for you to actually do? So if you're trying to put something off over the long term of creating a good habit for yourself or creating a good outcome for yourself, where are you putting it off because you're afraid it might be too much for you to handle? And can you break it down into something a little bit smaller and easier, like we'll talk about during the rest of the book? Specifically, we're talking about tiny changes. And what James says about this is that meanwhile, improving 1% isn't particularly notable. Sometimes it's not even noticeable, but it can be far more meaningful, especially in the long run, right? It's not putting that pressure on ourselves, especially to make that earth-shattering improvement that everyone will talk about. Sometimes these types of improvements that are the type of improvement that we're trying to make here in Atomic Habits aren't even noticeable, especially to people who are on the outside, unless it happens over the long run, unless you're committed to gaining over a long period of time. The difference between a tiny improvement can make over time is astounding. So here we'll go into some of the logic behind this. Here's how the math works out. If you can get 1% better each day for 1 year, you'll end up 37 times better by the time you're done. That's amazing, right? Through the power of compounding, you'll end up 37 times better just by making a 1%, such a small improvement that you wouldn't notice a difference day to day. Conversely, if you get 1% worse each day for 1 year, you'll decline down nearly to zero. What starts as a small win or a minor setback accumulates into something much, much more. Very interesting, the effects that just one single year can have. Let's talk a little bit more about the 1% improvement. It's the fundamental teaching of Atomic Habits. Choosing to make a small change instead of a large change can feel scary at first, often because we built up the pain of our current habit in our mind so much. Then we're willing to almost do anything and everything towards changing. How many of us out there have something that we're doing that's causing us pain in our lives, and we've just built up the pain until it's absolutely red hot? Now, I'm here to say that that's not necessarily a bad thing. As Tony Robbins says, in order to make a change, we need to associate massive pain with our current behavior and massive pleasure to our potential. And I think that's absolutely right. I believe that most people are already very good at this. I think everyone is doing this on a day-to-day basis. But because we're constantly doing that exercise in our head, we automatically default to massive action. Like we talked about before, we take massive action, which is completely unsustainable, and we can't keep it up over the long term, and changing a habit over the long term is where the real power comes from. Massive action is hard to keep up. Plus, the power of compounding is a force much, much more powerful than any action that we can take in a single moment. not paying attention to the small slides is something far more insidious. See, people aren't paying attention to the small slides because they're too busy associating that massive pain with their current behavior. They're not paying attention that while associating this massive pain, they're actually sliding a little bit further into that massive pain because that's what they end up focusing on. When you let a certain cornerstone habit slip away, you slowly but surely can get to a pretty dark place. That's why it's so important to not only set a positive vision for your future, right? Like we talked about here with Tony Robbins, associate massive pleasure to your potential. But it's also very important to set a negative vision for your future. And this is something that I've actually taken from Jordan Peterson in his self-authoring program, where he essentially gets you to write out what your best potential future is, assuming that you take all of the responsibility to move towards that potential future, and then what your worst potential future could be, assuming that you take no responsibility for your own life and you slide down to the level of your negative habits. I think it's important to know both sides, but I also think it's important just to know the negative side insofar as you can use it to motivate you. I don't think you should focus on it too much because you can end up getting to a dark place just by focusing on that. So we talked a little bit about tiny changes, and I want to talk a little bit more about remarkable results. James says that habits are a compound interest of self-improvement. The same way that money multiplies through compound interest, the effects of your habits multiply as you repeat them. They seem to make a little difference only on any given day, and yet the impact they deliver over months and years can be enormous. It is only when looking back 2, 5, or perhaps 10 years later that the value of good habits and the cost of bad ones becomes strikingly apparent. And I believe that this is happening more and more because of the culture that we're in nowadays. We end up seeing people who have done work for 10, 15, 20 years and have only then become an overnight success. And when we look at those people, it can become very easy to say, if I take massive action today, I will be able to get where they are in a matter of weeks or maybe even a matter of months. But little do we know that they have not actually been an overnight success, but they've been working at their craft or their profession for 10, 15, 20 years, sometimes more. So it's very easy to fall into this nowadays. And when you look at the 1% improvement numbers, I hope what you can do is extrapolate this into your own life and how you can commit to the long term of creating good habits. So as we talked about before, 1 year and you'll be 37 times better than you were. But through the power of compounding, after 2 years, you'll be 1,400 times better than you were just 2 years ago. After 5 years, you will be 76 million times better than you were on the first day that you picked up a new habit. And then if you are 10 years down the road, it's a number that's too big a number for this mind map. It literally has hundreds of zeros. Very interesting. So now you can see the difference between where you are right now, which is essentially year 0, and where the person who you're looking up to, who is quote unquote that overnight success, who's taken 1% improvement over a 10-year term, they are literally too many times better than you for you to even think about. And that's what you need to look at as far as compounding interest goes. But in the short span of 10 years, you can become that number as well. Now here's a little bit of a graph to just illustrate these numbers right here and illustrate the decline as well. You can see the power of compound interest, right? It starts here and you're going, and then all of a sudden it starts getting better and better and better, and then eventually the line is essentially straight up. You gather so much data, information on your own habits, on the way that you work best, on the way that the habit is working for you, that you just basically get the graph to go straight up. And you can see that this 1% decline, if you started at, let's say you started at 50%, right? You go all the way down until you're almost touching 0 just within a single year. Quite interesting. So another point that is made is that really your potential is unknowable. There's no way to know what your potential is. It's literally impossible to know what we're capable of. As I was showcasing before, we're thinking of people who are overnight successes as, maybe they worked at it for a year. They're 37 times better than where you are currently at. But really, they're a number that's too big for this mind map. Better than you currently are. And that's where you could get to. Very interesting. It's literally impossible to know what we're capable of until we let go of the limits, and really until we start committing to that 1% improvement that we can make every single day with some of these habits that we're going to create and some of the habits that will break. So the reason that we quite often quit these habits and quit these things that we are trying to achieve is called the plateau of latent potential. And this is one of the main reasons that people end up cheating on their diets. This is the main reason people stop maybe using the Pomodoro timer when they're working. It's the reason that we're not accomplishing a lot of the habits that we are hoping to accomplish. So James talks about the plateau of latent potential like this. He says, if you find yourself struggling to build a good habit or break a bad one, it is not because you have lost your ability to improve. It is often because you have not yet crossed the plateau of latent potential. And we'll talk a little bit more about this. But essentially what's happening is you are still at the point where you can't even realize. You remember that graph that we saw before? You're still at the point where you can barely even realize that you're making improvements. The compounding hasn't quite caught up and made giant leaps possible yet. He also goes on to say that complaining about not achieving success despite working hard is like complaining about an ice cube not melting when you heated it from 25 to 31 degrees. Your work was not wasted, it was just being stored. All the action happens at 32 degrees. If you're Canadian like me, this would be like heating it up to -1 degrees Celsius. Or it would be like heating it up to 0 degrees Celsius where ice melts. When you finally break through that plateau of latent potential, people will call you an overnight success. That's exactly what we were talking about before. When you get to the point on the graph where you're essentially going straight up, your potential is absolutely limitless. And day over day, you are constantly doubling and doubling and doubling. It takes quite a long time to get there, but once you're there, people will think you're an overnight success. He goes on to talk about the San Antonio Spurs. He says, mastery requires patience. The San Antonio Spurs, one of the most successful teams in NBA history, have a quote from social reformer Jacob Riis hanging in their locker room. It says, when nothing seems to help, I go and look at the stonecutter hammering away at his rock, perhaps 100 times without as much as a crack showing in it. And you can imagine that stonecutter just hitting and hitting and hitting, and how much work it is to split the rock. Yet at the 101st blow, it will split in two. And I know it was not the last blow that did it, but all that had gone on before. That's a very interesting analogy as it comes to habits and kind of becoming an overnight success. The next thing I wanted to talk about was that little things add up to big things. It's just not always visible, right? Too often we set goals like, I want to lose X weight by Y time, because those are 2 points that we can see. I'm here now, I'm at point A, and I want to get to point B by a certain amount of time. When we set goals like this, if the results don't show up by that day and time, we stop doing the little things that would have eventually led us to success. Very interesting. How many times have you set a goal and the very next day or a week later or 2 weeks later, you realize how far away you are still from the goal? See, that's where the plateau of latent potential comes in. It can be very hard to push through this plateau of latent potential to see actual results. And once you see actual results, it's relatively easy to keep up the habit, as we'll talk about in the 4 laws in one of the next points. But once you start to see results, it's relatively easy to keep the habit up because you're constantly motivated, because you can see yourself making such big changes. And this is where the power of compounding comes in. We have a little bit of a graph of the plateau of latent potential, but he says it's a hallmark of any compounding process. The most powerful outcomes are delayed. So this is actually, I think, an economic term, that plateau of latent potential. And you can see on this graph that what you think should happen is a straight line towards success. And you can see that the straight line ends up here at the end of the allotted time on our graph, and the results are obviously the up axis. But what you can see is you actually start to make a little bit of progress, and you think it should be incremental, right? You can see there's this big dip here, right? I think Seth Godin talks about this. There's this dip right here that feels like you should be better than you are, right? But after you get past that dip, you can see how much further ahead you actually are by the power of compounding. than if you were incrementally gaining. So technically, that power of compounding is much more powerful in the long term than linear improvement. But because we have this linear mindset that we should continually be linearly moving towards whatever goal we have, we end up failing, not because we're not moving towards the goal, and not because we're not moving there potentially even faster than what the linear improvement would get us to do, but because we are setting ourselves as this straight line, and if we don't meet the straight line, we get discouraged and quit. So the next point is to be the stonecutter. Have you ever bailed during that plateau of latent potential? And can you go back and look at some of the things that you've tried to accomplish in your life and determine, did I quit that really because I wasn't capable of it? Or did I quit that because I wasn't willing to go through that, as it says right here, valley of disappointment, to go through that dip, right? To get past that plateau of latent potential. Is there anything that you've done that you quit before you moved past that plateau of latent potential? And then how can you remind yourself to be the stonecutter? As he talks about here, the San Antonio Spurs actually have the quote on their locker room. Where could you put that type of a quote, or where could you remind yourself that you need to get through this plateau of latent potential? Because it's going to happen in everything you do, whether it's in your work, whether it's in your fitness, whether it's in relationships. It always is about getting through that plateau of latent potential and committing to that 1% compounding interest on your habits. So the next part is a very important part for me. After we've got past the plateau of latent potential, we realize that tiny changes equal remarkable results, and that there's always going to be a plateau where it's going to be very difficult, that valley of disappointment that we have to get through. Now we need to talk about identity, and this one really connected with me. He says that identity change is the North Star of habit change, and that absolutely resonates with everything else that I have researched and everything I've experimented with in my life. If you can change at the identity level, it becomes much easier to change at the behavior level, like in the Robert Dilts model that we'll talk about in a second. He also goes on to say that the remainder of this book will provide you with the step-by-step instructions on how to build better habits for yourself, your family, your team, your company, and anywhere else you wish. But the true question is, are you becoming the type of person you want to become? And that really is the question that you should be asking yourself. The first step is not what or how, but who. You need to know who you want to be. Otherwise, your quest for change is like a boat without a rudder, and that's why we're starting here. So the next 2 points that I'm going to talk about are actually about how to build the habits that you want to build. But what we're going to talk about first is about identity. And this is a very deep and important level to understand before you move on to trying to create new habits for yourself. James goes on to say that you have the power to change your beliefs about yourself. Your identity is not set in stone. You have a choice in every moment. You can choose the identity you want to reinforce today with the habits you choose today. And this brings us to a deeper purpose of this book and the real reason that habits matter. Wow, interesting. A book all about habits is really all about identity. That shows you how important he believes identity is, and I would have to agree with him. Building better habits isn't about littering your day with life hacks. It's not about flossing one tooth each night or taking a cold shower each morning. How many of us have tried similar things to that? I know I definitely have. Or wearing the same outfit each day. It's not about achieving external measures of success, like earning money, losing weight, or reducing stress. Habits can help you achieve all of those things, but fundamentally, they are not about having something. They are about becoming someone. How interesting is it that he says, it's not about achieving external measures of success, money, losing weight, or reducing stress. He's actually talking about how you shouldn't be focusing necessarily on those things, because the more you focus on those things, the more they become real in your life. Very important to focus on the habits and the things that you can control, and that's why we're talking about this book. Ultimately, your habits matter because they help you become the type of person you wish to be. They are the channel through which you develop your deepest beliefs about yourself. Quite literally, you become your habits. Very interesting. Now, are you setting out on a goal in order to achieve something because someone told you that you should earn more money or lose some weight or reduce stress? Or are you setting out because you want to be the type of person who deserves more money, or the type of person that deserves to be healthy, or the type of person that deserves to live a low stress lifestyle? Very interesting to think about your motivations when it comes to deciding on which habits you'll cultivate and which habits you will get rid of. So first I want to talk a little bit about life hacks. These are very popular nowadays. I mean, they are just everywhere. They're in books. There's entire books written about life hacks. There's blog posts. There's videos. They're all over the place. Podcasts, everything, right? And the media is really selling them as the solve that's going to cure all your ails. If you just wake up early and take a cold shower, you'll become, healthy, wealthy, and, whatever else you're looking to accomplish. Not only do these not lead to any real measurable success, but they confuse your identity because you're not acting as yourself. You're acting as the person who created this life hack. And you can see that these life hacks, quite often when you've tried them, they are the ones that get quit the quickest. If you're trying to take cold showers and it's because someone else told you that you should take cold showers, a guru or whoever, you're going to quit that very fast because your body doesn't believe that's who you are. You're trying to be someone else instead of becoming a better version of yourself. Now, the reason that we're talking about identity specifically so in depth is because I really believe in the Robert Dilts model, the neurological levels as it pertains to habit change and how it relates to creating your best life. So as you can see, and if you've been on the channel before, you probably know about the Robert Dilts model. But as you can see, we start off at the top of the pyramid with your vision, or what are you a part of? And once you change your vision, everything else underneath it is going to be much easier to change. Once you change what you are trying to become, that's when everything below you changes. And vision and identity really are kind of one and the same when it comes to setting goals specifically. Because as James says, you become who you are. And that's what identity says. Now you have to change your values and beliefs, and you have to change your capabilities in order to change your behavior, which are essentially your habits. So you can see that if you change at the behavior level, but you don't change who you really are, what's important to you, or what you're a part of, you can see how that behavior becomes incongruent. And the base of the pyramid is going to be off kilter, and you're not going to have a strong base to stand on. It's very important for all of these to be in alignment. The easiest way to do it is to line them up from the top down. Now, it also works from the bottom up. You can change your environment, and we'll talk a little bit about that as well in order to change your behaviors. But it's not going to last very long if you don't change your identity first. And this is really what my self-coaching course is all about. I'll leave a link to that down below if you're interested in it. But basically what I do is I break down every level and how you can best align that level for you. So the next question we're going to ask is, who do you want to become? This is the question that you should be asking before you decide what habits you want to develop or change. Talk a little bit more about identity. Are you a healthy and fit athlete? Are you a successful business person? Are you a family member or a boyfriend, or are you a father, etc.? Who are you really on an identity level? That's the type of question that you need to ask yourself. And not only who are you, like who am I, as in the identity level, but also on your vision level, right? Who do you want to become because of that, right? So take some time to think about this. I think that this is the best way to understand identity. Identity is very esoteric, and it's hard to give you a step-by-step process on how to figure out what your identity is. But if you take some time to think on this, quiet time can be helpful, where you just listen to your thoughts and you kind of decide, okay, this is what I want to be, this is who I wish to become, and what is truly you, and what is something that was given to you, right? If you have some thoughts that are thinking about, oh, I want to be a successful businessman, or I want to make a bunch of money, just question that. It might be true. That might be who you are. That might be what you want to do. But just question, where did I pick up that belief? Where did I pick up that identity from? And try and determine what roles you're playing in your life. And are those the roles that you want to be playing? And should you become more of you, or should you become more of what someone else has told you to become? Right? The next part, we'll talk about becoming who you are. And James says that the more you repeat a behavior, the more you reinforce the identity associated with that behavior. In fact, the word identity was originally derived from the Latin word essentias, which means being, and identium, which means repetitively. your identity is literally your repeated beingness. So you can see that if you change on the identity level, all the levels down below it are what's going to reinforce that identity to you, right? If you change here, it's going to be very hard to actually change at the identity level. But if you change at the identity level and reinforce it with all the levels down below, that's where you create a rock solid foundation. So we'll talk a little bit about changing your identity. James talks about how you can change your identity by repeating the desired behaviors as frequently as possible. And if you want to repeat your desired behavior, live from your new identity. So you can see how he's talking about it the same way I'm talking about it with the Robert Dilts model, where you change from the identity level and then you follow it up with behavior. And then if you want to change at the behavior level, you follow it up with the identity level. So it's a double feedback loop between the top of the pyramid and the bottom of the pyramid and all the levels in between. I wanted to talk a little bit about self-talk at this point in time. Dr. Shad Helmstetter says you are what you tell yourself. So in order to change your identity and your values and beliefs, you need to continually reinforce what you want your identity to be and what you want your values and beliefs to be. So self-talk is what you say to yourself all the time. It's basically what you're going to be listening to while you're doing your meditations. Listening and modifying your self-talk can be extremely powerful when trying to make a habit change. Let's say, for example, you're sitting and you're meditating during your quiet time, and something keeps coming up that's saying, I need to earn more money. I need to be a better business person, and et cetera, and et cetera. Now, question yourself, are you bringing that forward from yourself, your true identity? Is that the truth to you? And if it is, you need to reinforce that you are the type of person that deserves to accumulate that money, deserves to be that business person. And once you reinforce that in yourself, that will help you change your identity on your identity level. And then habits are changed easiest at the identity level and supported at the behavior level, exactly like we talked about before. You need to change your identity and support that identity change at the behavior or habit level. And that's essentially what the entire book is all about. And again, that's what my self-coaching course is all about through these neurological levels, how to understand yourself and become your best self. So now we're going to get into the actual habit making sequence. And it's called the 4 laws because there's 4 stages of habits. And I'm going to break down exactly how you can build yourself new habits and exactly how you can break the old ones that you have that you want to break. So James says, if a behavior is insufficient in any of the 4 stages, it will not become a habit. Eliminate the cue, which is one of the 4 stages. I'll show you the 4 stages quickly. The 4 stages are: number 1 is the cue, number 2 is the craving, number 3 is the response, and number 4 is the reward. Now, if you've read The Power of Habit by Charles Duhigg, you'll notice that a lot of this is the same. And I believe that I saw James talk about how he's actually building on The Power of Habit. That is one of the best habit books that are out there currently. He says, reduce the craving, and you won't experience enough motivation to act. Make the behavior difficult, and you won't be able to do it. And if the reward fails to satisfy your desire, then you'll have no reason to do it again in the future. Without the first 3 steps, a behavior will not occur. Without all 4, a behavior will not be repeated. So it's very interesting. You can see how if you have a cue, a craving, a response, if you have all those things, you can get yourself to do it once, but the reward, right, the satisfaction is what's going to get you to actually continually repeat that habit, which of course is what we're looking at because we want to make that 1% improvement every single day. He also goes on to say that in summary, the cue triggers a craving, which motivates a response, which provides a reward, which satisfies the craving, and ultimately becomes associated with the cue. Together, these 4 steps form a neurological feedback loop: cue, craving, response, reward, cue, craving, response, reward, that ultimately allows you to create atomic habits. This cycle is known as the habit loop, and it's essentially just this line, but formed into a circle. And again, this is exactly how you'll create your own habit. What I'm going to do is I'm going to go over the 4 laws as it relates to the 4 stages. So you can see each law is about a certain stage, and it just tells you how you have to manipulate that law in order to create a habit or break a habit. So law number 1 goes about the cue, right? This is the cue to get you to respond or to have a craving to respond to. The cue needs to be as obvious as possible. And we'll talk about some examples of how you can do that down below, but you need to make it absolutely obvious that's so obvious that you can't possibly miss that this is the cue to do the habit that you wish to do. And then if you want to break a habit, it's just the opposite. You want to make it invisible. Law number 2 is craving, to create a craving for it, right? So if you want to create a habit, you got to make it as attractive as possible. And then obviously if you want to break a habit, you have to make it unattractive. Law number 3 is response. To create a habit, to respond to a habit, you want to make it easy to respond as possible. And if you want to break a habit, you want to obviously make it as difficult to respond as possible. Level 4 is the reward. So if you want to create a habit, you have to make it satisfying. I think that's a really good word for it. And if you want to break a habit, you have to make it unsatisfying. So let's talk about some examples. Let's talk about creating a good habit. We'll talk about how to create potentially an exercise habit. So law number 1 is obviously cue, but to create that habit, we need to make it obvious. So how are we going to make exercise obvious? Number 1 is by an implementation intention. You'll just tell yourself, I will work out first thing in the morning at my home gym or wherever you want to work out at, right? And then you can also, to make it obvious, design your environment. Put your clothes out the night before, right in front of your door. And also, make your gym appealing. Make whatever you're going to do something that you actually like to do inside your gym. Make it so that your gym is appealing. Law number 2, in order to make a good exercise habit, would be to make it attractive. And a couple ways that you can do that are 1, visualization. Think about how you'll feel after all the exercise and all the benefits of the exercise. And number 2, and make it attractive, is you could pair it. You could pair that habit with something that you enjoy, like maybe drinking a coffee or a tea or etc. And once you kind of link that habit that you find difficult up with a habit that you really enjoy, that will make it more attractive. Law number 3 is to make it easy. So you want to downscale, right? How can you downscale your exercise so that they can be done in 2 minutes or less? Maybe you could say, I will walk on the treadmill for 2 minutes, right? And then through the power of 1% better, eventually you will be doing a full workout in no time if you continue to make it just 1% better. The other thing that you can do to make it easy is think the one thing. What's one thing that I can do that will make everything else easy or unnecessary? And that's from The One Thing by Gary Keller. If you start off with something that might take you 2 minutes, but it makes something that is much more important easier or completely unnecessary, then that will make it very easy for you to get the habit done, right? 80-20 principle. Make sure you 80-20 principle your habits so that you can make them as easy as possible. Law number 4 is to make it satisfying. Give yourself an immediate reward, right? We talked about this before, drinking a coffee or tea after your workout, or maybe listening to good music during your workout. Give yourself an immediate reward. You can also create a habit chain. This is talked about in The One Thing as well. Track your habits somehow and create a chain. Growing that chain will have satisfaction, and breaking the chain will feel bad. For example, you could have a calendar up on your wall, and you could mark a big red X every day that you do the habit that you wanted to do. You suddenly built up a chain of a few dozen days, and you don't want to break that chain. It will be satisfying to continue to add an X to that chain, and unsatisfying to not be able to add an X to the chain. So let's say we wanted to break a bad habit, right? We used all those laws to make a good habit. You can obviously use this exact model and do the exact same thing for any habit that you want to create. But in order to break a bad habit, we just need to do the opposite. Law number 1, if we don't want to eat junk food, we got to make it invisible. We got to put it out of sight. Take out all the junk food, or at least put it out of sight. That's a great way to go ahead and not eat any junk food. Law number 2, make it unattractive. Visualization again, right? Reframe it. Highlight the benefits of avoiding the junk food in your mind using visualization. You can see that law number 2 is easy to do with visualization. Law number 3, you got to make it difficult. Increase friction. More steps between you and the junk food, aka leave the junk food at the store. And law number 4 is to make it satisfying. Unsatisfying is what this should say. If you make it too satisfying, you'll be doing it all the time. Remember the reframe, right? The reframe that we did before. Keep in mind how much better you feel and your energy levels increasing when you're not eating junk food. So very, very interesting how you can use the same exact steps, the same exact laws in order to either create a good habit or to break a bad one. And this is exactly what you're going to do with the entire atomic habits system. Next, we're going to talk about Sortie's Paradox. And there's an ancient Greek parable known as the Sortie Paradox, which talks about the effect one small action can have when repeated enough times. One formulation of the paradox goes as follows. Can one coin make a person rich? If you give a person a pile of 10 coins, you wouldn't claim that he or she is rich. But if you add one more, add another, and maybe if you add another one, at some point in time, you will have to admit that no one can be rich unless a coin can make him or her so. So you can see that you start with maybe one coin, and then two, and then three, and eventually it adds up to a pile. And at that point in time, you're rich. But where is the point in time that you aren't rich and rich? There's no real, it's kind of a paradox, right? If one coin can't make you rich, then you can't possibly be rich. Very interesting. We say the same thing about habits. Can one tiny change transform your life? It's unlikely you would say so, but what if you made another, and another, and another? At some point, you'll have to admit that your life was transformed by one small change. The holy grail of habit change is not a single 1% improvement, but 1,000 of them. It's a bunch of atomic habits all stacked up, each one a fundamental unit of an overall system. The secret of getting results that last is to never stop making improvements. It's remarkable what you can build if you just don't stop. Small habits don't add up. They compound. That's the power of atomic habits. Tiny changes, remarkable results. That's what the book is all about. So what does that mean? That means never stop making improvements. Building good habits is a lifelong journey towards becoming who you wish to be. Remember, identity. Can you change your identity to the type of person who is constantly improving? Think, can you change your identity to the identity of someone who is constantly improving? And if you can do that, what would that mean? What would that person's habits look like after a year, 2 years, 5 years, 10 years? Can you adopt this style of thinking? And can you play forward in your mind, in your identity, how you will be in 2 years, 5 years, or 10 years? And that is Atomic Habits by James Clear. Very interesting book. I think there's a lot of good, usable content in here. I think it not only brings it forward at the what level of learning, but it really brings it forward at the how level of learning, exactly how you can accomplish what you're looking to accomplish through the power of tiny habits. Thanks for being with me today, and I hope to see you in the next video.